Hello to all who are watching. This is a competitive analysis presentation of Ruth Chris Steakhouse, which is now considered to be the world's largest fine dining company. This presentation is by Joel Baudanza, Chantel Champion, Jonathan Evans, and Joe Musser. My name is Jonathan Evans, and I'll be presenting the following two slides. The table below shows the highest spreads for each demographic variable for each steakhouse restaurant. According to Ruth Chris chart below, home value, household income, education, age, and occupation have the highest spreads. These variables have the highest buying habits for Ruth Chris Steakhouse and are highlighted in yellow. The variables that are highlighted in green for Lone Star and Black Angus can be found under the Ruth Chris top 5 variables. The ones highlighted in orange for Lone Star and Black Angus are consistent between each other. As for the variables that are highlighted in purple for Lone Star and Black Angus are unique and are not found in either of the other steakhouses. The top 5 variables for Ruth Chris Steakhouse have very little consistency among the other comparison brands. Household income was the only variable that was found throughout all three, which is a good indication that these restaurants focus on marketing to their respected household income brackets. Ruth Chris seems to be in a category all by itself. Although between Lone Star and Black Angus, the two variables out of the top 5 are shared, race and census region, indicating that these brands focus on marketing to their different segments of the market. This table depicts the highest indices for Ruth Chris highlighted in yellow. The indices for Lone Star and Black Angus are related to the same segment. They are not all the highest or the lowest for the segment, but they are just the indices relating to the top 5 of Ruth Chris. High indices suggest brand loyalty to the particular steakhouse. Indices that are related close could mean that a segment is more likely to eat at another steakhouse. For example, the index for home value of $500,000 or more for Black Angus is 222, and the index for Ruth Chris is 288. This could be translated that the customers of Black Angus with a home value of $500,000 or more are more likely to go eat at Ruth Chris over Black Angus. This shows, along with the other data in the table, that Ruth Chris customer base are far more loyal than the other two comparison brands.
The first set of Ruth Chris Steakhouse demographics we'll be looking at are age and education. The bar graph on the left illustrates the age range of consumers that went to Ruth Chris. The age range is between 18 years old all the way to 65 years old and older. As you can tell by the bars, the most common age range is people in the age of 45 to 54 years old. The bar graph on the right shows the education demographic. According to the data, people who have college education or any other form of higher education are more likely to go to Ruth Chris. This is because these people have higher paying jobs and can afford to go out to a nice restaurant such as this. The next set of demographics are home value and household income. The graph on the left shows the information for home values. Of all customers that went into Ruth Chris, 47.3% of them had a home value in the range of $200,000 to $499,999. This makes up nearly half of the customer population for Ruth Chris Steakhouse. This is connected to the other demographics because these people can afford to go out. Inversely, people who had homes valued less than $50,000 made up 0% of the customer base. This is due to the fact that they couldn't afford to go out to dinner at this establishment. The bar graph on the right depicts the household income of Ruth Chris customers. It shows that the highest percent of customers had an annual household income of $75,000 to $149,999. These people go along with the rest of the data that suggests that people who live in the upper echelon of society are the main demographics of Ruth Chris Steakhouse. The last demographic we looked at is occupation. According to the data, a majority of customers had jobs in the professional and related occupation sectors of our society. They make up 22.7% of our population. These are the higher paying jobs that are out there, and these people enjoy a nice night out, no matter what the cost. This data also shows that people in natural resources, construction, and maintenance do not make up a lot of the customer base. It appears that people in sales and office positions make up the second most customer population, with 21.1% of the customer base.
Looking at this slide, we compare Ruth's Chris to its competitors of Lone Star and Black Angus, looking at the demographics of age and education. As you can see in the first graph, the majority of the consumers that go to Ruth's Chris for dinner fall between the age range of 45 years old to 54 years old. Same goes for Lone Star, as the majority of their consumers also fall within this age range of 45 years old to 54 years old. Black Angus differs in this comparison, as the majority of their consumers are of age of 65 years old and older. Looking at education, we can see that the majority of consumers for Ruth's Chris have an education level of graduated college plus. Looking at Lone Star and Black Angus, we can see that their education level is of no college whatsoever. In this slide, we compare Ruth's Chris to its competitors of Lone Star and Black Angus, looking at the comparison of home value and household income. Looking at the first graph, we can see that the home value of a Ruth's Chris typical consumer falls between $200,000 to about $500,000. Lone Star and Black Angus also fall between the same range of a home value of $200,000 to about $500,000. Looking at the next slide of the household income, we can see that the majority of the Ruth's Chris consumers have a household income of $75,000 to about $150,000. Lone Star and Black Angus also fall between this household income range of $75,000 to about $150,000. Looking at this slide, we can compare Ruth's Chris to the competitors of Lone Star and Black Angus, looking at the solo demographic of occupation. Looking at Ruth's Chris, the majority of their consumers have an occupation professional and related. Looking at Lone Star, the majority of their consumers have an other employed occupation. Black Angus is similar to Ruth's Chris in that their occupation is also professional and related.
Mass marketing. The primary demographic we recommend for mass marketing are those educated beyond college. This group represents an index of 199, which is also the highest index within that demographic. The largest share is also represented by this demographic at 54%. College and beyond individuals are 99% more likely to dine at Ruth's Chris compared to those who only attended college, who are actually 114% less likely to dine at Ruth's Chris. The next table, representing our second demographic, where we focused on age. People between the ages of 55 and 64 have an index of 160, which is the highest index within this demographic. The largest share of those dining at Ruth's Chris is 24.9%. Based on the indices, people between the ages of 55 and 64 are 60% more likely to dine at Ruth's Chris, compared to the age group of 45 to 54, whom are 33% less likely to dine at Ruth's Chris. The next table displays that 24.1% of those dining at Ruth's Chris are between the ages of 55 and 64, unlike the age group of 18 to 24, who are only 3.3% likely to dine at Ruth's Chris. For niche marketing, we targeted those with a home value of $500,000 plus, which actually represent an index of 288. The $500,000 plus also represented the largest market share at 21.7%. Based on the indices, people with a home value of $500,000 or plus are 188% more likely to dine at Ruth's Chris, while those with a home value of $200,000 to $499,999 are 116% less likely to dine at Ruth's Chris. The next table displays that 21.7% of people dining at Ruth's Chris own a home worth $500,000 or more. Our second niche market we targeted was the occupation group. Professionals related occupations have the highest index at 170 and the greatest market share at 22.7%. Based on the indices, professionals are 70% more likely to dine at Ruth's Chris, while management, business, and financial operations are 20% less likely to dine at Ruth's Chris. The next table displays that 22.7% of people dining at Ruth's Chris are professionals, while those employed with natural resources, construction, and maintenance jobs are only 3.6%. For mass marketing, we targeted several media channels. First, those being the websites. Facebook was our primary shareholder at 45.1% of the market. Following that was MapQuest.com at 39.9%. Weather.com represented 38.5% of market share. YouTube closely behind at 35.4%. And finally Amazon.com at 28.2%. The next media channel is magazines. The first magazine is Parade Carrier newspaper, representing 49.7% of the market share. Following that was the Metro Puck Carrier newspaper at 42.6%. And after that was the NNN Top 100 Daily at 41.1%. People Magazine followed that at 27.6%, while Better Homes and Gardens followed at the last with 22.3%. The next media channel was cable services. CNN topped it off at 46.6% market share. The Weather Channel shortly behind that at 44.1%, and ESPN right behind at 43.6%. TBS was behind that at 36.9%, and HGTV at 31.5%. The next media channel is TV shows. First we had Football Pro Weekend at 41.4% market share, then Football Specials Professionals at 36.7%, Football Again College Weekend at 27.5%, and Football Pro Pregame Shows at 25.6%, and finally Baseball Specials at 23.3%. The last media channel was radio. Between weekdays 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., we had 58.1% down. Then Mondays and Fridays, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. was 44.3% market share. On the weekends, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. was 35.2%. 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on the weekends was also 29.8%. And finally, 7 p.m. to midnight was 18.5% market share. Lastly, for media channels, we have our niche marketing targets. For our websites, we looked at Expedia.com, which topped it off at 22.2% market share. Travelocity behind that at 19.5%. CNN.com at 18.5% market share. WebMD had 18.1%, and Orbitz.com had 14.5% market share. Following that with magazines, Costco Connection topped it off at 19% market share. Then after that was Sunday Magazine Net Carrier newspaper at 15.2%. Time Magazine followed that at 14.4%, and Consumer Reports at 14% closely behind. And lastly, Teen Vogue at 2.7% market share. For our cable services, we targeted Bravo at 17.6% market share, Nickelodeon behind that at 16.4%, BBC at 8.5%, FSN at 8.5% as well, and ESPN Classic at 6.3% market share. The TV shows that seemed to be most productive for niche marketing was Horse Racing at 10.3% market share, Awards Specials at 10.2%, Sports Anthologies at 9.8%, Pageant Specials at 9.4%, and finally Golf Channel at 6.5%. Excuse me. The last media channel was radio again, Mondays through Fridays, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., 44.3% market share. 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. on weekends was 35.2% market share. 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on weekends was 29.8% market share. 7 p.m. to midnight was 18.5% media share on the weekends. And midnight to 6 a.m. on the weekends was 4% market share.